Explain how Crooks has been hurt by racist attitudes in terms of social, economic and psychological terms. Like the other men on the ranch, Crooks is a victim of the Great Depression, but his situation is made even harder due to the prevailing racist attitudes of the day. Crooks is the stable buck on the ranch, which means that he is the most senior man in charge of caring for the animals, upon which the smooth running of the farm depends. Such a key position on the ranch would suggest that the boss treats Crooks well, and yet Candy tells George that the boss gives him hell when he's in a mood. Candy goes on to observe that Crooks doesn't give a damn about how the boss treats him, but it's more likely that Crooks has to endure the boss's moods in order to keep his job. The boss knows that he can get away with taking his frustrations out on Crooks on account of him being black. The fact that Crooks remains on the farm suggests he knows he is economically bound to the ranch, as there's little chance of him finding paid work elsewhere. His physical disability does not seem to be a factor in preventing him from finding paid employment elsewhere, as even though his back pains him, we are never given any indication that it hampers his work in any way. Socially, Crooks has suffered the effects of racism, in that he is segregated from the other men in terms of their living arrangements. When Lenny innocently asks why he isn't wanted in the bunkhouse, he explains that the other men say he stinks. The use of the word stinks is again used when Carlson describes Candy's dog. Steinbeck is making a connection between bad smells and animals, which in turn allows us to infer that the white ranch hands see Crooks as less than human, an attitude rooted in their racist beliefs. Coupled with the fact that Crooks' designated living space is a room that joins onto the barn, with the manure pile under the window, suggests that the boss also sees him as less than human, more of an animal. When you view someone as less than human, it becomes the justification for the harsh and racist treatment. We also see that Crooks is largely separated from the other men during their leisure time. Crooks is allowed to play horseshoes with them and is even admired for his skill in this game, but that's the extent of his social world. When all the other men go into town on Saturday night, Crooks is left alone on the ranch. When Candy first meets George, he describes a tale concerning Crooks being able to socialise with the other men that happened the previous Christmas. Candy tells George that the boss gave the men a gallon of whiskey, and they let Crooks come in to share it. Candy goes on to explain that during that evening, the one time when Crooks had the opportunity to share some company, a Skinner called Smitty took after Crooks. Smitty attacked Crooks while the other men looked on in the name of entertainment. Smitty was not allowed to use his feet as a concession to Crooks's physical disability, but that afterwards he boasted that he would have killed Crooks if he had been allowed to kick him. The fact that Smitty feels safe boasting about being able to kick a black man to death shows just how comfortable people were with their racist attitudes. What is even more shocking about this story is that Candy recounts it with relish, suggesting he enjoyed the spectacle and the chance to relive it by telling it to George. If an otherwise sweet and gentle character like Candy can enjoy such a violent scene, then we can assume that racism was rife throughout society and that Steinbeck is showing just how ugly it was. Crooks has been hurt so much in the past by trying to socialise with the other men that he's learnt not to repeat the same mistake. Therefore, when Lenny arrives at Crooks's room on the Saturday evening, Crooks tries to repel his guest. In his childlike state, Lenny has no concept of racism, and here Steinbeck is proving that racism is not inborn, it's learnt from others. We're not born hating, we acquire it from society. We see that Crooks has been damaged psychologically as a result of the racism he's suffered. Lenny has just made himself comfortable on the nail keg when Crooks realises that for once he has the advantage. He teases Lenny about what would happen if George wasn't around, and as he starts to paint the picture, his face lighted with pleasure as he psychologically tortures Lenny. Here he is enjoying being the bully instead of the victim, showing he is hurt inside. He only stops his torture because he suddenly becomes aware of the physical threat that Lenny can pose if angered. When Candy also ends up gravitating to Crooks's room, he helps Lenny to explain the dream. Initially, Crooks is sceptical, but ultimately won over to the point when he dares to ask if he can join them and lend a hand. When George discovers Lenny and Candy discussing the dream with Crooks, he scowled, suggesting he is not happy with the idea of extending the welcome to yet another person. Crooks senses this and calls Candy back, telling him to just forget it. In this heartbreaking line, he goes on to say that he wouldn't want to join them in the dream. He excludes himself before anyone else has the chance to, showing just how psychologically hurt he is. Crooks doesn't even try and fight for a place at the dream farm because he's been beaten back too many times before, and he knows that the white man's answer is always no in the end. Just like the other men, Crooks has had to contend with loneliness and poverty, but his struggles are intensified by the corrosive effects of racism.